Do, 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 do. All right, well, good afternoon, Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasiewicz. I'm going to take about 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, in anticipation of our 2 o'clock meeting, annual salary board, which will follow a very short, say a very brief commissioners meeting. We're going to be discussing right now really the Carbon County salary study. I'm going to kind of use a quad chart to kind of talk a little bit about the objectives of the salary study, the methodology, the results, and then just some random thoughts, let's call it flotsam and jetsam, in regards to that particular study. I also am going to be recording this session, so I have it for later use. All right, so here we go. We got that going. Again, this is Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasiewicz. This is a short session to provide some background on the salary study that the Board of Commissioners PowerPoint slide. All right, that should be coming up right now. There we go. All right. I'm just checking my phone, my device, make sure everything is working and functioning. All right, got it there. The slide is up. So let's go. So this is kind of my perspective on the Carbon County salary study. I'm using a quad chart to kind of go through it in a systematic way. So let me get over to there. There we go. Over on that slide. So first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the study objectives. Internally, right, we're looking to achieve internal equity. That is, decrease the pay inequity between the high and low earners, referring to that to internal equity. So really reduce the range, the difference between low and high earners. And the impact that we have historically seen on increasing that disparity when we give cost of living increases. For example, 3% of a $30,000 salary is significantly less than a 3% increase of a $50,000 salary. And as you continue to give those across the board increases, that disparity or that range gets wider and wider. So we want to look at internal equity, but also external equity. So that's really looking at what is fair market salaries for the duties, responsibilities, the essential functions of a particular job or classification, as you'll often hear stated in county, called classifications instead of jobs. We're also trying to ensure in the study that we get between the 45th and 55th percentile in regards to average salaries. And that's where businesses shoot for, right? 50% pay more than you, 50% pay less. Now, a lot of things feed into that. Why would you choose 45 compared to 55? And often it comes down to money, right? What you can afford to be on that average, and maybe what your sub goals or objectives are. You may want significantly higher above average if your peers are much higher in pulling away your employees. We also wanted to reduce the pay scale grades and steps. So we have grades and steps. Grades normally increase at 5% each grade change. Scales historically at 3%. Now, over time, those steps went all the way out to X, so 24 actual steps. Grades were down there around the 16 mark or even more, if I recall correctly, and I have a bullet on that. So that's basically, an X and Y axis, and bring those two together at where they intersect is your salary. And I'll give an example of that a little bit later. So again, we want to reduce those down, and that would also help reduce the range from what is now 97%, from the highest to the lowest, to about 45%, right? There are some constraints and restraints that we had in regards to ultimate implementation and collecting of the data, right? We recognized late in the study, and this wouldn't have been till August, September, so we're already probably 8 months into the study, that based upon budget projections, we couldn't really afford, without going back to the well, which is the county taxpayer, of any option provided that exceeded about $800,000. And that's not just salary, because remember, once you have salary, but you also have your FICA and your Medicare contribution, plus a 5% retirement contribution that the county makes. So all those things had to come together to kind of keep us under about $800,000. And also, the reality is this board is in its 4th and final year of its term. Therefore, you don't know in January of 2024, when a new board takes its seat, what it will be composed of in the way of who will be the elected officials and what their intent will be to kind of continue along the path of the salary study, or maybe just to reject anything that hadn't been already implemented. So we want to implement as much of the salary study as we could possibly afford at this time under this current board, who is committed to an implementation of a policy that creates better internal and external equity. All right. It's important to understand also that the job study wasn't looking at merit. It wasn't merit-based. It wasn't taking each individual, looking at their evaluations and determining based upon merit what they provide in value to the county. That would determine or be a factor in determining the wage, right? So I like to say it was merit blind or merit agnostic. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about the study process, general findings and observations. And again, I'm really watering, I don't want to say I'm watering down, that would be diluting them, but really condensing the overall study into just a few bullets, just to give, kind of one over the world, wave top level understanding. So the study process, it was done in 4 phases. First and foremost, there was an outreach, and that was employee meetings. Evergreen Solutions came in, held a series of meetings that provided all the employees in county government, nearly 400 plus, had the opportunity to sit in on discussions or really overviews of the study, how it was going to play out, what the objectives were. After the outreach, stepped into the classification phase. That primarily utilized the JAD assessment tool. Every county employee had access to a site where they could go ahead, after having received their job description, their key functions, essential duties, they could go in and do a job assessment. That is, well, okay, this is what your job description says, but what do you really do, right? And then once the employee did that, then the supervisors had an opportunity to go in to that job assessment and confirm or deny, right? Validate the input the employees were saying. So if the employee was saying, well, I have this new function that is not on my job description, and now I am doing X. Well, the supervisor had the opportunity to say, yes, that is correct. This job description has been modified to include these additional duties, functions, key essential tasks. At the same time, Evergreen started looking at our grades and scales to see how they were set up and how we might be able to reduce them. Grades less, steps less. And then subsequent to that, and again, you got to understand a lot of these things were moving parallel. It's 4 phases. They're not necessarily sequential. There's a lot of parallel tasks taking place. So these phases are really moving in parallel and not necessarily sequential. So we looked at, we did a peer survey, and we'll talk a little bit about the details of that peer survey. So those were counties similar to Carbon and surrounding that we sought input from them in order to understand what the real market value of those positions or classifications are. And then finally, it was the solution phase. Here are recommended options that the county should consider implementing. And there's ultimately 7 optional pay implementation plans. Now, this final solution will also require a few more steps. We have 8 of 11 tasks done. Evergreen still will come in and do a final narrative, so a written portion to the study information that has already been provided, and then also help us redo some job classifications. So that peer data that I was talking about, Evergreen Solutions reached out to 25 peers, Class 6 counties, so population-wise, similar to Carbon County, in addition to looking at our neighboring counties, right? Those who are right around us, Lehigh, Luzerne, Northampton, Schuylkill, et cetera, right? We got responses from 20 of 25 of them. And this took place between the end of June, primarily July, and then some lingering ones into August as we went back saying, hey, would you provide in information? I would say kind of in the restraints area up above also is probably the fact that while we were hoping that they would provide us the full range, a starting employee to an employee with 30 years in this particular job classification, right, with these key essential functions, earns this or earns this over the time of a 30-year career. A lot of them simply provided us averages or based upon billets they had filled. So they might have had a secretary who has 1 year, a secretary who has 3 years, right? And maybe that's scale 1 and 3, but actually their pay scale goes all the way up to 10. They didn't necessarily provide that full range. So again, there is mostly science to this because it's working with data, but there's a little bit of art and a little bit of flexibility that you have to have due to the input that was provided back. Again, we could ask them for specific data, but ultimately it was up to those peer counties to decide what they were going to provide back to Evergreen Solutions. All right. Importantly, there was an applied cost of living index, right? So what's the cost of a loaf of bread in Carbon County compared to a loaf of bread, in Lehigh County, right? And overall, though, how does that impact what an appropriate wage is? I will tell you the cost of living in Carbon County of the 25, we were about the 5th highest cost of living. Not obviously, but the fact is Lehigh, Northampton, Susquehanna County, those were three that were higher than Carbon. I think Carbon was about 102.7. Those were 102.8, 103. So they had higher cost of living. But the cost of living is Carbon County, it is quite high compared to other, specifically the Class 6 counties. So market analysis, right? What we looked at, about a 70% match of essential tasks and roles. So, is an apple an apple? Is a secretary in Venango County the same as a secretary in Carbon County, which are both Class 6 counties? And if 70% match of essential tasks and roles, that was really good. It was accurate. And then what we ended up finding out when it comes to wages, as part of this, about 10.8% of our positions were below market minimums. 8.5 were above market midpoint. And overall, if you averaged it all out, Carbon County was about 3.7% below average actuals. Again, take everything with a grain of salt. Like I said, this is not simply science. There's some art here due to the information that came back from our peers. An interesting concern was there significant wage compression? That is, let's say you have an individual who's been here 30 years and earning $60,000, and then you have someone who came in just a year ago and they're already at 50,000. That's wage compression. Well, the fact is there was no significant finding of wage compression. And that was a concern that some employees had as part of some survey questions that were asked as part of the joint assessment tool. I do want to make the point, not necessarily out of this, it wasn't out of the study, but through independent research. So county raises, salary increases from 2017 to 2021 actually exceeded the CPIU. And I'm a big advocate of tying non-merit raises to the CPIU, right? The Consumer Price Index for this specific geographical area. And every year as the county from 2017 through 2021 was given a 3% across the board increase, that ended up actually over those years ended up a net increase of about 3.5, 3.1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that neighborhood above CPIU. All right, so let's look at results of the study, right? The fact is we had 7 recommendations, but I wanted to kind of give the bottom line up front. So we wanted to bring ultimate accepted recommendation by Evergreen was to bring to a new minimum. That is, bring them to the 45th percentile in regards to average salaries. Now that was going to cost more or less about $742,000. But bear in mind, right? This is non-union. Again, these are the non-union because those collective bargaining units, those wages are set separately from the annual salary board and particularly from the primacy or primary focus of this study. So it excludes the 5% county retirement. So at 5% of that $741,000, that's additional cost to the county taxpayer. In addition to the FICA, right, which is Social Security of 6.12%, which is a mandatory contribution by the employer, plus Medicare of 1.45% also. So when you see the salaries, the per hour or annual, you can add on top of that 5%. Now, obviously, if someone was earning $20 an hour and the salary recommended and that is accepted that they should get 25, the county is only assuming an additional 5% retirement on the delta, right? The difference between the $20 and $25. So it'd be 5% of $5 would have to be contributed towards the employee's retirement fund, which earns annually 5.5% on there. All right. So like I said, 7 options were presented. They ranged from $800,000 all the way up to about $2.8 million. There was the new minimum, which we selected. Then there was a new minimum with a minimum adjustment. And that would have been simply taking the new minimum and then ensuring that every employee received a minimum increase, let's say 2% across the board, plus getting everyone up to their new minimum. There was higher year parity. So then what you do, once you got them up to their average salary, then you would have now had to consider where they were on that 30-year continuum of service. So were they midpoint or were they at 30 years? So what we say for county government, a career is 30 years. Midpoint for the purpose of salary study, right? Midpoint is 15 years, and at 30 years, you become capped, right? But that, again, that was $2.8 million. So unreasonable in this year, based upon constraints that we had placed, would it be applicable to implement, appropriate to implement? Overall, 335 adjustments of salary has been made. The average increase, right, 10.8%, or $2,191 is the average salary increase for employees. Now, again, always keep in mind, then the county is also kicking in another 5% on that. So here, what you would see is an additional about $110. So really takes you to about, the average is about $2,300 per employee. Now we know what about averages, right? There's some above that average, some below it. Not quite a median, right, where you get 50% above, 50% below. But again, averages it out. All right, 190 of the positions saw wage increases greater than 7.1%. So 7.1%, why? That was the CPIU for this area as of the 1 December numbers that were out. And they may have been actually the November numbers released in December. 204 positions greater than 5% increase. And then it continues others. I think you have about 222, 225 individuals, positions that got over 3%. So looking at non-supervisor increases versus supervisor, because again, this is part of that range, right? Where no doubt supervisors earn more than subordinates. We had a concerted effort to ensure that those who were in the most dire straits wage-wise would have the most significant increases. And what we saw by accepting the recommendation of Evergreen, that the non-supervisors, so the lowest earning employees on average, actually saw a 12.3% increase, while the supervisors saw an increase averaging 4.3%. So again, we know we're making progress and we're actually reducing that range and getting the salaries, primarily the starting salaries, up. And this is important for recruitment, right? You know, when you're offering $11.38, versus 13, where we just happen to be. So non-supervisor minimum wages for county employment at the lowest level, you would you previously last year would be 1138. With adoption of this new wage scale, it takes it up to $13 is the lowest salary in county government. Now, a lot of those $13 positions, a lot of them, not all of them, are part-time and seasonal positions, such as lifeguards, seasonal maintenance at Mock Chunk Lake Park, liquid fuels program, or the bridge crew, things of that nature. Not all, but significant. Supervisory minimum went from $13.41 to $16 an hour. And one of the things you'll see, if you look at the job classifications in the organization of county government, and what is defined a supervisor is really loose. I mean, you look at a lot of positions and you'll say, yeah, I'm trying to understand where the supervisor part of this comes in to play and stuff like that. So those things that have to be looked at when it comes to reclassifying positions. So we were shooting for the 45th percentile when it comes to average target salaries. We hit right on the 45th where we want it to be. I talked about, let me see if I have it here. I can show you guys. All right, here, it's so small. Let me see anyway. All right. All right. So that is a wage scale. You can see going down the left-hand side are the grades, and each one goes up 5%. From grade 1 to grade 2 is 5%, grade 2 to grade 3 is 5%. Then going across left to right, the letters, they go up 2.5% each. So let's say you have increased duties and responsibilities. You came in as a, let's just call it a 1A. There's a recommendation due to a change of duties and responsibilities that are significant. Department head or row officer is recommending they go to a 1B, non-supervisor. Well, that would increase the salary if approved by 2.5%. If you went to recommendation was approved to go to a C, that would be a 5%. And keep adding 2.5% as you move from left to right on the steps. As you go down grades, which could change, maybe you assume a new position, transfer to another office in the county, you could see, go in increments of 5%. What we were able to do, and we were able in the supervisor grades go from 21 steps to 13 grades, supervisor grades go from 21 to 13, and then we were able to take those steps from 24 to 16 with a wage range from the individual just hired to the 30-year career from 97% down to 45%. And then in the non-supervisory, we're able to go from 16 grades to 13 and 24 to 16 steps, right? So 16 to 13, 24 to 16, with, again, a salary range much more compressed, 45%. And as I wrap up here, a couple things, Flotsam and Jetsam, right? Because at 2 o'clock, I'm going to jump into a quick commissioners meeting. I suspect no more than 10 minutes at max. And then we'll jump into a couple hour long annual salary board, which should be quite interesting, right? One of the recommendations, and of course we knew this was going to be necessary, there are going to be some unhappy campers in any study, right? There are always winners and losers, right? If you're making the hard right decisions versus easy wrong. I think there are less than 10 individuals whose under 1%. And there are, I think, 3 that might have been recommended a 0 increase. Now, those who are receiving 0, what that basically says is that where they're at in their career right now exceeds where they actually should be in regards to salary. I hate to use the term, they've been overpaid in the past, but I don't know how else to sugarcoat it. Again, because this isn't about merit, right? This was about looking at the duties and responsibilities. Then you place them where they should be, look at where they should be in the number of years. If they exceed where they should be based upon the study, well, then for the sake of the study, no increase would be due this year. Again, if you're accepting the study in its entirety without individual modifications. I'll tell you, you start pulling out one card at a time, making these little adjustments, that house of cards will collapse and you'll have total chaos. And the value of the study, with its internal equity, external equity, target average salary, and reduced pay scale and grade objectives will be totally lost and irrelevant. But we are implementing a process for appeals and a challenge process to commence after the annual salary board concludes and we start rolling into our regular monthly salary boards. We also recognize that we need to methodically address the need for reclassification and updating of positions. There are positions that we saw from the JAT that have to be formally updated. Now we have a lot of the information from the JAT. Let's take that and update the duty positions, responsibilities, key essential functions. And I think it's importantly, HR, human resources, has been the focal point for Evergreen Solutions and employees and the commissioners to Evergreen back to us throughout the entire process. And importantly, what they've provided to Evergreen is kind of ground truth, right? What are the unique characteristics of working in county government in Carbon County? So like a QA, QC role, quality assurance, quality control, ensuring that Evergreen understood this unique county employee environment compared to maybe other counties they have worked with across the United States. Again, you always need that in there, kind of the vetter, and make sure Evergreen wasn't going looking at us like some other county, let's say in Florida or in Arizona or other places where they have done studies. So for all intent and purposes, that is Carbon County salary study in a nutshell, one over the world, wave top level. Again, at 2:00, I would ask that you go ahead and tune into the annual salary board. It's going to be pretty interesting. Might be a bit of emotion displayed. Also, individuals are passionate, sensitive when it comes to pay and salaries, mostly when you see a year of inflation where we're at 7.1% here in this local geographical area. So this is Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasiewicz. I appreciate having the opportunity to share with you some highlights from the Carbon County salary study using my quad chart. And if you have any questions, after today's meeting in the future, you can always reach out to me at 570-503-6780, 570-503-6780, C. Lukasiewicz at carboncounty.net. Hey, the only time that cell is kind of on do not disturb, 5:30 to 7:30 every evening. Every once in a while I may look at it, but I tend not to respond or answer during that time unless it's a case of loss of life, limb, or eyesight, right? Don't see those too often, right? So again, feel free to give me a call if you have any questions, 570-503-6780. Carbon County Commissioner Chris Lukasiewicz, hoping everyone had a wonderful New Year's